The studio is empty. February 7, in the evening. The woman who built this room is standing in the middle of it, hair down, and she says, "I have spent a decade being disciplined. I am done." The woman across from her has been waiting for the words that explain 7 months of silence and erasure, the apology that actually costs something. She crosses the 4 feet. She touches her jaw first. How did 2 women arrive here from a slap at the most public gala of the year? That story starts now. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I had been at Meridian Creative for 22 months when the Harlow Grand Prix was awarded for the Lumen campaign, and the woman on stage accepting it had not said my name once. This is the part I need you to understand before I tell you what I did next. I am not a person who makes scenes. I am not a person who loses control in public, who lets her feelings spill into spaces where they do not belong, who lets the personal complicate the professional in ways that cannot be explained away. I had spent 7 years building a career in an industry that punishes women who feel too visibly. I had learned to package everything inconvenient into something functional, to take the things that hurt and convert them into work. The work was how Vale Mercer had found me. She had come to a pitch in the spring, not as a client, but as a consultant the client had brought in, someone to tell them whether the proposals in front of them were worth their investment. I had been representing a small agency in Brooklyn, competing against houses 3 times our size for a fragrance brief that would have tripled our annual revenue. I had spent 6 weeks on our presentation. I had done the thing I was best at doing, building a concept that felt so organic to the client's identity that they would leave the room believing they had already been thinking it before we arrived. The pitch went 40 minutes over schedule. The client said they needed time. Vale sat in the back row through the whole presentation and said nothing until it was over, and when she finally spoke, it was not to the client and it was not to my team. She looked at me from across the table and said, "You make it look like inevitability. That's the hardest thing there is to manufacture." I said, "It isn't manufactured." She looked at me for one long, careful second. 3 weeks later, Meridian's offer was in my inbox. I want to be clear about what Meridian was, before any of the rest of this. It was not just a job. Meridian Creative was the most influential luxury brand consultancy in the city. Vale Mercer had built it from a 1-room office in Tribeca over 12 years, client by client, campaign by campaign, with the specific and particular brilliance of someone who understood that luxury is not about product, but about the story a person tells themselves when they buy one. She had 3 Harlow Grand Prix nominations in 4 years. She had turned struggling heritage brands into cultural moments. She had done all of this with a team she had personally chosen and a philosophy she could articulate in a single sentence. The best creative work makes the audience feel that it was already true before they saw it. That sentence was why I had said yes. Vale Mercer was 39 years old. She had founded Meridian at 27 with one client, a family-run leather goods house in the Flatiron district whose brand language had calcified into something their youngest customers could not read. She had rebuilt it in 18 months. The family still sent her a bottle of something extraordinary every January, which she kept on the shelf in her office and never opened, and which I had always understood as a monument to a version of herself she had moved past. She wore black. She was always in black suits with slim lapels, trousers that fit with the precision of things chosen rather than settled for. Her hair was dark and she kept it controlled in professional settings, pinned with the precise economy of a person who had decided that hair down was a different kind of message. She had a watch she wore on her left wrist that I had never heard her explain. She moved through spaces the way people move when they have stopped performing and simply are the specific, unhurried economy of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing in every room she entered. Her tell, if she had one, was small. A jaw flex when a decision cost her something, a shoulder that stilled a fraction of a second before she spoke a difficult thing, the half second before she broke eye contact, which she almost never did. In 22 months, I had cataloged these without meaning to. The first 8 months at Meridian were the best professional months of my life. Vale gave me space and resources and enough challenge that I was working at the edge of my ability every week. She reviewed my concepts in person, not through intermediaries, and her feedback was the kind that made you want to immediately apply it rather than argue with it, not because it was comfortable, but because it was always right. She could look at a layout or a narrative framework and identify the specific place where the work was protecting itself instead of taking full risk, and she could tell you how to fix it in one sentence that did not soften what needed to be said. I had never had a creative director of any kind who operated that way. I had never been in a room with someone whose professional attention felt that complete. I noticed other things too, and I filed them in the category of professional context. The economy of her movement through the studio, no gesture wasted, no word unchosen. The way she made pushback from clients an occasion to become more precise rather than more accommodating. The way she appeared on late nights not to monitor the work but simply to be present in it. She was the most interesting person I had ever worked for. I told myself that was a professional observation and nothing else. The Lumen brief arrived in February, 7 months into my time at Meridian. Lumen was a fragrance from Cassiel, a Parisian house with a 40-year history and a declining position among younger consumers. The brief asked for a campaign that could reintroduce the brand to a demographic that associated legacy fragrances with their grandmothers. It was the kind of problem that required you to understand not just the product, but the emotional architecture of aspiration, how a 28-year-old woman thinks about luxury, about tradition, about what it means to wear something that has existed longer than she has. Vale gave the brief to me directly. Not to a team, not to a rotation of directors. To me, "This is the piece you deserve," she said. "Don't protect it." I understood her. She had told me from the beginning that my tendency was to build ideas to a certain point and then stop just short of the thing that would make them vulnerable. She was right. I knew she was right. The protective instinct was the one thing standing between my work and the work I was actually capable of. I spent 8 months on Lumen. I did not protect it. The concept I eventually delivered was built on the idea of inheritance, not in the old sense of inherited wealth or status, but in the more honest sense of what you receive from the people who came before you when they were not trying to give you anything at all. The grandmother's perfume not as a relic but as a trace of someone who laughed before you knew her, loved before you existed, left something of herself in the air of a room you were never in. The campaign was titled, "Carried Forward." The visual language was intimate and dense, and not at all the direction Cassiel's previous agencies had taken. It was the most complete piece of work I had ever made. Vale reviewed the final presentation in May. She sat across from me in the small conference room for 40 minutes and went through every element of it. She was, for those 40 minutes, the version of herself I had been working for since October, fully present, precise, asking the questions that mattered, her attention on the work and the work alone. She said, at the end, that it was the strongest campaign that had come out of Meridian in 4 years. I said, "That's a high bar." She said, "You cleared it." I do not know why I remember the specific way she said it, not warmly, not effusively, just with the level, certain delivery she brought to every accurate thing, the directness of it, the way it asked nothing of me in return. She told me it was the strongest work in 4 years, the same way she told me when a concept wasn't landing. Precisely, without softening. Something shifted after that conversation. I noticed the shift before I understood what it was. Vale had always been present in the studio, available, engaged, responsive. After May, she became calibrated. Her availability adjusted in a direction I could not fully account for. She was not absent. She was managed, which is a different thing, and more telling for being deliberate. I told myself it was the scale of the Lumen rollout. There was a lot to coordinate. She had other clients, other priorities. The fact that she was less visible to me specifically was not information, I told myself. It was operations. I was wrong, but it took me another 3 months to understand how wrong. The meeting from which I was first excluded was a Cassiel client review in late June. Small, internal, a check-in on campaign rollout pacing. I had run the 7 previous Cassiel meetings. This one's calendar invite went to Dom Faber, our COO, and to Oliver Park, one of our junior art directors, who had executed layouts under my direction for the past 4 months. Dom was a precise, immaculate woman of 43 who navigated the studio politics of Meridian with the professional grace of someone who had watched enough things go sideways to stop being surprised by any of it. She had been at Meridian for 9 years. She knew everything. She said almost nothing. I asked her about the meeting exclusion. She said it was an administrative scheduling decision. The look on her face while she said it was the careful look of someone who had made a commitment to a version of events and intended to honor it. I went to Vale. I sat in her office, clean white walls, a single large window, a desk with nothing on it except a closed laptop and a ceramic mug I had never seen used with anything other than the specific green tea she kept in the kitchen drawer, and I said, "You excluded me from the Cassiel review." She was standing at the window. She turned when I came in. She was in black, always in black, a slim-cut jacket over a silk blouse, the watch on her left wrist. Her hair was pinned. Her face was what it always was in professional settings, composed, level, impossible. The meeting was operational, she said, not creative. There is no operational Cassiel conversation that doesn't have creative implications, I said. I needed Dom's perspective on the production timeline. You could have included me and gotten Dom's perspective. She looked at me, composed, the jaw level, the shoulders still. Something in the room had a particular quality that I had not encountered with her before, the quality of a conversation whose real subject was being carefully excluded from itself. I needed the meeting to be efficient, she said. That is the most oblique explanation you have ever given me for a specific decision, I said. Something moved across her face, the kind of movement that barely registers, the kind I had started paying attention to without quite deciding to. It's the accurate one, she said. I could not push further without a different kind of argument, and I did not yet have the language for the argument I actually wanted to make. I left her office with the incomplete answer sitting in me like a splinter I could not see well enough to remove. It was only the first one. By August, a pattern had formed that I could diagram if pressed. 2 more client meetings from which I had been redirected to non-client-facing work. My 2 most trusted junior team members, Sasha Delacroix, who had the best visual instincts of anyone under 25 I had worked with, and Marcus Chen, whose production management had made the Lumen rollout run on time, reassigned to other directors without my input. A creative review process that had previously involved Vale and me directly now filtered through an internal layer where my concepts came back with notes from an external creative consultant. Vale had quietly contracted. The external consultant was Oliver Park, now elevated from junior execution to something with an ambiguous title that placed him between my creative direction and Vale's final approval. I watched it happen with the fury of someone who can see a shape forming without being able to name it. Every action was deniable as operational restructuring. There was no email to point to, no meeting record to document. Only the accumulation managed distance built one reassignment at a time. I watched and I did my work, because Lumen was still running, and it was still mine. Cleo Marsh was the one who said it to me first. Cleo was 35, and had been a senior art director for longer than most people in our industry lasted at that level. She was warm in the specific way of people who have seen enough to stop pretending that warmth requires optimism. She had a habit of bringing coffee to difficult conversations and never pretending the conversations were about anything except what they were about. She sat down across from me in the small kitchen in early September with 2 cups and a look on her face that told me she had made a decision about something. "I need to ask you something," she said. "I need you to hear it like a friend and not like a colleague." "Okay," I said. "Has it occurred to you," she said, "to ask yourself what specifically changed in May?" I looked at her. The studio noise was going on around us, the printer in the corridor, someone's music through a closed office door, the particular hum of a building running at full capacity. "Because I have been watching this unfold for 3 months," Cleo said. "None of what I'm seeing is something I can put in writing. But you are the most talented director in this building, and you are being systematically moved out of the client relationship, and I want to know if you know why. I've asked her twice, I said. I haven't gotten a real answer. Cleo looked at her coffee for a moment. She said, quietly, what happened in May? I thought about the conference room, the 40-minute review, the way Vale had looked at the work, and then at me. The sentence, you cleared it. The specific quality of the room after. The thing I had noticed and filed. Nothing happened in May, I said. Cleo did not argue. She picked up her coffee and said, when you figure out what happened in May, you're going to know what's been happening since. I thought about that conversation for the next 2 weeks. I thought about it during the first Harlow Award submission, when Vale filed Lumen as a Meridian entry without a specific director credit. The submission form had a field for primary creative director. It was empty. I went to Dom about the credit omission. Dom told me the submission had been filed as an agency entry, consistent with Meridian's standard practice for major award submissions. She said this while looking at her monitor. I said, Dom, we have never filed an agency entry without individual director credits for a Grand Prix category. She said, Vale made the decision to submit this way for the Lumen campaign specifically. I said, did she say why? Dom was quiet for one carefully managed moment. She was the kind of person who carried other people's difficult decisions in the pockets of her professionalism, without complaint and without betrayal, which was both the most admirable and the most maddening thing about her. She said, Rue, some things are above my ability to intervene in. I left Dom's office and stood in the hallway. I understood what had been happening for 4 months. Vale Mercer was not trying to move me out or damage my career. She was trying to minimize my visibility in her own space, building barriers around the things we did together, the way you build barriers around something that keeps threatening to become more than its container can hold. And I did not yet understand why. Phoebe Alden found me at an industry panel event in October, 3 months before the gala. Phoebe was a beauty editor at Architectural Frame, a publication that covered luxury and culture with the specific intelligence of a house that had been doing it long enough to know the difference between trends and things that mattered. She had a quick, clean mind and the social ease of someone who spent her professional life getting people to tell her true things, and she sat down next to me at the panel break with the directness of someone who had already decided what she wanted to ask. I hear the Lumen campaign came out of your building, she said. I said, it came out of Meridian, yes. She said, I want to write about the creative direction, the carried forward concept specifically, the inheritance framework. It's unlike anything Cassiel has produced in 20 years, and I want to understand how it was arrived at. I said, that's a conversation you'd need to have with Meridian's leadership. She looked at me the way journalists look at people who have just told them something interesting while trying to say nothing. I filed a request with Vale Mercer's office 6 weeks ago, she said. I haven't heard back. I said nothing. The silence sat between us with a weight Phoebe clearly registered. She said, the campaign sourcing points to a single creative direction. The concept DNA is identifiable. It reads as one person's framework, not a committee's. I said, you should call Dom Faber. She manages media inquiries. Phoebe looked at me for one more second. Then she said something I carried out of that event and sat down on my kitchen counter and looked at for weeks afterward. She said, whatever is happening there, I hope you're accounting for the cost of it. She walked back to the panel. I sat in the warm conference room light and thought about what she had meant, and about what it said about me that I knew exactly what she had meant and had been deciding not to account for it. The Harlow Grand Prix announcement came in November. Lumen by Cassiel, with creative direction by Meridian Creative, named winner in the Luxury Brand Experience category, the most prestigious category in our field. The prize carried $200,000 to the consultancy, and more than that, in the institutional credibility that translated directly into future client acquisition. Vale received the announcement in her office. I heard about it from Sasha, who had heard from Marcus, who had been in the building when the email came in. Vale did not come to tell me herself. I sat at my desk in the studio and looked at the Lumen boards, still pinned to the wall, the ones I had lived inside for 8 months, revised 47 times, the ones that had been cited by Campaign magazine as the best luxury creative work of the year, and I felt something go cold and very still inside me. The Harlow Grand Prix Gala was a month away. 300 people, every major name in the luxury industry, the fashion industry, the creative industry, press tables, a broadcast component, the highest visibility evening of our professional year. I put the feeling away. I went home and dressed in the only way I knew how to dress for an evening that required its full weight from me in black, narrow-cut heels that made me aware of every step on marble and carpet. The gala was held at the Whitmore Hotel, a venue in Midtown designed with the specific aesthetic sensibility of spaces built for occasions that will be photographed. 12 tables of 25, crystal chandeliers casting the room in the particular gold that made everything look significant. The Meridian table was third from the stage. I arrived and found my seat, and said hello to Dom, to Cleo, to two Cassiel clients who were attending as organization guests. Cleo sat across from me with the look of someone who had decided to be present for whatever the evening produced. Vale arrived 45 minutes into the reception hour. She was in black. She was always in black. But this was different, a structured floor-length dress with a neckline that was architectural in the specific way of garments worn with full knowledge of what they do to a room. Her hair was up, the watch was there. She moved through the space with the composure that was her baseline in public, unhurried, precise, uninterested in being watched, and impossible to stop watching. She found the Meridian table and made her way to the far end of it from me. The seating had been arranged this way. The distance was not accidental. Nothing Vale Mercer did with physical space was accidental. I watched her talk to the clients. I watched her greet the editor-in-chief of a major trade publication who stopped at our table specifically to mention Lumen. I watched her receive the compliment with the composed, genuine warmth she managed in public present without being effusive, secure without being cold. I watched her not look at me once. Cleo leaned across the table during the second course. She said, very quietly, "You okay?" I said, "Fine." She said, "You're holding your fork like a weapon." I put the fork down. I picked up my wine. I breathed through the cold, still thing in my chest that had been building since November, and was, in this room, at this table, becoming something I could no longer keep in the functional category. The awards began at 9:30. They moved through the categories with the efficient professionalism of events that have a broadcast consideration. The presenter for the luxury brand experience category was a woman I recognized from a consulting firm I knew by reputation. She took the stage with the polished ease of someone who had prepared for this moment and did not mind being visible. She said the things that were said before awards, the quality of the field this year, the difficulty of judging, the particular achievement of the winning campaign. She said the word Lumen. She said the name resonated with the room. Then she said, "And the award goes to Meridian Creative for Carried Forward." The room made the sound rooms make when something expected becomes certain. Applause, warm and real, the standing at tables kind that meant the room agreed with the decision. Vale Mercer stood. She moved to the stage with the clean, unhurried pace she brought to every forward motion. She accepted the award, a crystal piece that caught the chandeliers in the specific way of objects designed to be photographed, and she stood at the microphone with that composure that was one of the most consistent things I had ever observed in a human being. She thanked the client. She thanked the presenting organization. She said something specific about the work, how the Lumen campaign had been a challenge in the way that the most important work always is, the kind that forces a team further than they believed they were capable of going. She said the word team 3 times. She thanked by name Dom Faber for production coordination, Oliver Park for visual execution, 2 client-side contacts at Cassiel. She paused. The pause lasted the length of a breath. She said, "And to everyone at Meridian who puts this kind of work into the world, thank you." She lifted the award. The room applauded. She descended the steps from the stage. I was standing. I did not remember the moment of standing. I was at the far end of the 3rd table from the stage, and I was standing and I was already moving toward the side aisle that ran parallel to the stage platform. and I was aware of Cleo's hand reaching toward my arm and not reaching it in time. And I was aware of the faces at adjacent tables tracking the woman who had left her seat during the applause, and none of that awareness slowed me. Vale reached the bottom of the stage steps. She turned toward the meridian table. I was 4 feet away when she saw me. She stopped. Her composure did not fracture in that moment. But something behind it did something deeper, less managed, something that registered in her eyes before the rest of her face could catch it. The microphone was still live. The presenter was still at the lectern. 300 people were watching whatever was happening between the base of the stage steps and the third table. I closed the 4 feet, and then I did the thing I had not planned and would not take back if given the choice. I raised my hand and brought it across her face, open-palmed, in front of the award she was holding, and the Cassiel clients, and every press photographer in the room. The sound it made was very small. The room's response was the opposite. She caught my wrist. Before I had finished the motion, before the momentum had fully resolved, before my hand had begun to pull back, her hand came up and her fingers closed around my wrist. Not hard, not punishing, just closed. And stopped. The award was still in her other hand. Her face was turned slightly from the contact. When she turned back, and I would think about this later, for a long time there was no shock on it. There was something else. The thing I had described at the beginning, the door opening rather than the door breaking. She looked at me. 300 people were very quiet. She said, in a voice low enough to be private, but not pretending the room was not there. Come with me. She did not release my wrist. She walked with her hand around my wrist, and the award in her other hand, and the room watching every step toward the corridor beside the stage, the green room access hallway that led to the backstage area. She pushed the door and walked through it, and I walked through it with her because her hand was around my wrist, and I had not yet decided to resist. The door closed. The corridor was narrow and lit with functional fluorescent light, the kind that exists backstage at every formal event the other side of occasions, the space where the performance becomes just a room. Chairs along one wall, a table with water, a half-eaten fruit arrangement that no one had touched. The sounds of the gala came through the door now muffled, present but reduced to something manageable. Vale set the award on the table. She released my wrist. I stood in the fluorescent light of the backstage corridor and looked at her and felt the full extent of what had just happened beginning to arrive, the adrenaline resolving, the specific texture of silence after a public thing, the knowledge that whatever had been true about my professional life before this evening was no longer in the same configuration. She turned and looked at me. Her face was not composed, not in the way I was accustomed to. The composure was there, but working visibly now, the effort of it showing at the edges in the specific way it only showed under real pressure. There was a slight warmth along her jaw where the contact had landed. Everything else was exactly as it had been in the ballroom, I said, before she could speak. You did not say my name. Her throat moved. I said, 8 months, 47 revisions. 2 months of press coverage that cited this campaign as the work of the year. I designed every element of it. You know I designed every element of it. And you stood at that microphone and you thanked Oliver Park by name. A silence. The corridor hummed. Somewhere beyond the door, the gala was resuming. Oliver managed the execution, she said. He was responsible for. I said, stop. She stopped. I said, Oliver ran layouts under my direction. He executed visual decisions that I made. He has 18 months in this industry. He is a good junior designer and he had nothing to do with the creative concept that won tonight. I know, Vale said. I stared at her. She looked at the wall, then back at me. I know, she said again, quietly, with the tone she used when the accurate thing was also the devastating one. Then why? I said. The gala music filtered through the door. She was very still. Because I was trying to manage something, she said. I said, what were you managing? She looked at me. The composure, in this light, in this small backstage room, was the thinnest it had ever been in 22 months. The things usually held underneath it were very close to the surface. She said, The fact that your name and my voice, in that room, in front of those people, was something I was not certain I could say, without it sounding like everything else it is. The corridor contracted. I said, "Say that again." She said, "That is all I can give you right now." I said, "That is not enough." "I know," she said. "I know it isn't." I looked at her. This woman who had recruited me with a sentence about inevitability, who had given me the Lumen brief, because she said it was the peace I deserved, who had told me I cleared a 4-year bar, who had spent the following 7 months systematically making me smaller, and who had stood at a microphone 11 minutes ago and thanked everyone in the room except me, and who was now standing in a backstage corridor with her composure barely held together, telling me that saying my name in public felt like too much honesty to survive. I said, "You spent 7 months making me invisible." "Yes. You redirected my client access. You reassigned my team. You filtered my work through Oliver so there were fewer direct interactions between us." Her jaw tightened. "Yes. And then you stood up there and you let him take the credit." "Yes," I said. "All of that is one decision. One ongoing decision. And I need you to understand that it cost me something real." She said, "I know exactly what it cost you. I need you to know that I know what you were trying to manage." I said, "And I need you to know that managing it that way." I stopped. There was no word that was accurate without also being more than I was ready to give her in this corridor. She said quietly, "Was wrong." I said, "Yes." She said, "I know it was wrong. I have known it was wrong since June." I looked at her in the fluorescent light, the slight redness along her jaw, the award sitting between us on the table. I said, "You caught my wrist." She said nothing. I said, "You did not pull back. You did not call for security. You caught my wrist and you walked me in here." She said, still quiet, "Yes." I said, "That was not a professional decision." A long silence. The Gala on the other side of the door. "No," she said, "it wasn't." The room held that sentence for a moment. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed to not be standing in this narrow corridor with Vale Mercer at the edges of her composure and the award we had both earned sitting between us. I said, "I'm going to leave now." "I need tonight to not be the rest of this conversation," she said. "Yes, I need you to understand," I said, "that I'm not finished." She said, "I know." I said, "And I need you to understand that whatever you were trying to manage, you are going to have to say it. Not tonight, but you are going to have to say it." Her throat moved. I looked at her for one more second. The woman I had slapped in front of 300 people. The woman who had caught my wrist before I could pull back. The woman who had just told me that saying my name in a room full of people had felt like more honesty than she could manage. I picked up my bag from where it had landed on one of the corridor chairs. I walked to the door. I said, without turning around, "Your apology is going to have to be specific." Behind me, in the fluorescent light, she said, "I know." I pushed the door open. The gala sound came back at full volume applause for whatever award had just been announced, the clink of a room resuming its evening. I walked through it toward the lobby without meeting any of the eyes that turned to track me. In the elevator lobby, Cleo was waiting. She was standing with her coat over her arm, and my coat draped over the back of a chair, and 2 glasses of water on the side table, and she looked at me when I came out of the corridor with the face of a woman who had watched me leave the table and made a calculation and arrived at this spot to wait. She said nothing. She picked up my coat and held it for me. I said, "I need to go home." She said, "I know." I said, "I need tonight to be over." She said, "I know." We walked out of the Whitmore together. The November air was cold and specific. The kind of cold that feels like accountability, no softness in it, nothing to let you delay the processing of what had just happened. In the cab, Cleo said, "Did she say anything useful?" I said, "She said she was managing something." Cleo said, "That's more than I expected her to say tonight." I said, "It's not enough." "No," Cleo said, "but it's a start." I sat with my coat pulled around me and the city going past the window and thought about the sentence. Your name in my voice, in that room, in front of those people, was something I was not certain I could say without it sounding like everything else it is. 8 months of deliberate erasure, a name not spoken, a wrist caught before it could pull away. And a sentence that was not an apology and not a full explanation and not nearly enough, and was, in some form I was not yet ready to name, more honest than anything else that had passed between us in 22 months. I went home. I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off for a long time. The city made its nighttime sounds outside the window, a taxi, someone's music from the floor above. The particular urban silence that is not silence at all, but the accumulation of 1,000 ordinary things, continuing without regard for what had just happened in a ballroom 4 miles away. I thought about whether whatever had been building between us had that quality, the quality of the thing that was going to be true regardless of how many months were spent arranging structure around it to prevent its visibility. I thought about Cleo's question. What happened in May? I knew what had happened in May. In May, Vale had sat across from me in a conference room and reviewed the best work of my career, and in the specific quality of her attention, in the way she had looked at the work and then at me and said, "You cleared it without warmth or decoration," but with the absolute certainty of someone speaking a fact they had been sitting with for some time in that moment. Something had become visible between us that had been present for months without being legible. She had seen it become visible. She had filed her chair back from the table and moved to operational distance before the conversation could become anything else. And then she had spent 7 months building structure between us to keep it from becoming legible again. I had let her build it because I had a job I valued, and a campaign I was not willing to endanger, and a professional life that did not have room for impossible things. And then she had stood at a microphone and thanked Oliver Park by name in front of 300 people, and something in me had broken through every container I had built for it in 22 months and walked 4 feet across a digination ballroom floor. I got up. I turned on the kitchen light. The brightness made everything small and actual. I made tea without turning the kettle all the way to boil because I wanted something warm, but not the version that required patience. The award was at the Whitmore. My name was not on it. Vale Mercer had said, "That's all I can give you right now. Not forever, not the closed door, not the end of the conversation. Right now. Tomorrow was still open." I drank the tea. I thought about what it had cost her to catch my wrist in front of 300 people, more than she had been willing to cost herself for 7 months. More than any structure she had built around this thing had been designed to permit. I thought, she is going to come to me. She is not a person who leaves damage unaddressed, and this tonight had become fully, publicly unmanageable. I washed the teacup. I went to bed. I lay in the dark with the city doing its quiet and continuous thing outside, and I thought about everything she had spent 7 months trying not to say. And I thought about the fact that now, in a backstage corridor, in fluorescent light, with a crystal award on a table between them, she had said the first word of it. Your name in my voice. Everything else it is. The rest of the sentence existed somewhere on the other side of tonight. I intended to make sure she said it. The light came in differently the morning after. Not softer. Not kinder. November light does not do either of those things. But different. The particular quality of a morning that arrives with the full knowledge of what the night before contained, the light of the day, after something that cannot be walked back. I lay in it for a moment without reaching for my phone, which was a discipline I had not managed in months, and I looked at the ceiling of my apartment and thought about what it meant that the first complete thought I had was not about the slap, or the room, or the press, or my contract. It was about the weight of her fingers on my wrist in a corridor that smelled of someone else's event, and the specific way she had looked at me when she turned around. I reached for my phone. The coverage had started within the hour. A photograph, first taken by a press photographer I did not recognize, positioned at the edge of the aisle, with the angle that captured exactly what had happened. My hand in motion. Vale already turning, the crystal award still in her other hand. The photograph was clean and unambiguous and had 17,000 shares by the time I looked at it. The headline varied by publication. Industry trade sites went for the narrative, Meridian Gala incident. The broader press went for the image. The image was too good to pass up, and several ran it without context, and 2 ran it with wrong context, and 1 ran it with a line that came close to accurate. Creative director confronts Meridian CEO at Harlow ceremony over uncredited campaign. I read them all. I put my phone face down on the nightstand. I made coffee. By 9 in the morning, Vale had contacted the Harlow Grand Prix committee. I did not know this yet when it happened. I found out from Cleo, who found out from Dom, who told her in the particular tone Dom used when she was conveying significant information while maintaining plausible deniability about the fact that she was conveying it. Vale had called the Harlow committee at 8:15 and requested an amendment to the official acceptance record. The amended credit listed the Lumen campaign as directed by Rue Evander, Senior Creative Director, Meridian Creative. Vale Mercer, founding partner and CEO, accepting on behalf of the organization. Cleo texted me at 9:47. It said, "She called Harlow this morning. Your name is on the record now." I stood in my kitchen with the coffee going cold in my hand and read that text 3 times. I did not know what to do with it. The credit was correct. It was the factually accurate version of what had happened, and it should always have been the version on the record. But the timing of it, the 8:15 call, the morning after hour of it, told me something about the night Vale Mercer had spent in the same city that I had been in, lying awake with the same November darkness outside. She had not slept. And the first thing she had done with the morning was make the one call she had been refusing to make for 3 months. I texted Cleo back. "Does everyone at the studio know?" Her reply took 45 seconds. Dom got in at 7:30. Dom always knows everything by 7:30. I put the coffee down. I got dressed. I went in. The studio was operating with the careful, attentive quiet of a place that has absorbed significant news and decided collectively to behave professionally about it. People who worked in luxury brand consulting understood discretion. It was the thing the industry was built on, and so what I walked into was not the buzzing of rumor, but the particular, focused quiet of people who were very deliberately looking at their work. Dom met me at the door to my office. Not the corridor. My office door. She was carrying 2 coffees, and she handed me one without preamble and said, "The Harlow Amendment will be published by end of week. Official record. Permanent." I said, "I know." Cleo told me. She said, "Vale sent an internal communication to the staff this morning. All hands email. It went out at 9. I said, "What did it say?" Dom said, "It said that the Lumen campaign credit had been filed incorrectly, the correction had been made with the Harlow committee, and that the primary creative direction on carried forward was Rue Evander's from inception to delivery." She said it without qualification, Dom added, slightly more quietly in case I had missed what that meant from someone who qualified everything. I said, "Where is she?" Dom said, "In her office." She has been in her office since 7. I went to my desk. I sat down. I looked at the Lumen boards, still pinned to the wall. They had been there for 8 months, and I had never taken them down, which had been a decision about the work and not about anything else. And now I understood it had been a decision about both. I did not go to Vale's office. Not that morning. The morning was not the right time. And I knew the difference between the courage required to walk into that office and the impulse to close the space before it had been properly honored. I worked. Sasha appeared at my door in the mid-morning with a tablet and a tentative expression and said, "The Lorne brief came in. Do you want to look at it today, or should I?" I said, "Put it on the desk. I'll look this afternoon." She put it on the desk. She started to leave. Then she turned around and said, with the particular directness of someone who was 24 and had not yet developed the instinct to filter, "We were all pretty glad you did it. For what it's worth." She walked out before I could respond. The Lorne brief was a hotel group rebranding. Mediterranean properties, 3 countries, a heritage narrative that needed updating. Under any other circumstances, it would have been the kind of brief that put a specific, contained smile on my face, the kind of problem I liked, spatial and layered and full of the texture that made a concept feel inhabited rather than performed. I opened it. I read the first 3 pages. I closed it. I walked to Vale's office. She was standing at the window when I came in. The same position she had been in the morning. I told her she had excluded me from the Cassiel meeting, the same window, the same light, the same controlled stillness. But something in the room was different. The posture was the same, and the suit was the same, and the watch was on the left wrist, but the quality of her stillness had changed since the last time I had seen her standing here. The managed composure was gone. What was left was just stillness. The kind that comes after a long night, not the kind that is performed. She turned when I came in. I said, "Dom told me about the email." She said, "Yes," I said. "And Cleo told me about the Harlow call." She said, "The committee will publish the amendment by Friday. It will be in the official record going forward." I looked at her. She was not asking for anything. She was not softening the facts, or adding context, or framing anything in a way that requested a response from me. She was standing inside the morning after, and not asking me to make it smaller. I said, "That is not sufficient on its own." She said, "I know." I said, "The credit is the correct thing. That should have always been true. Doing the correct thing now is not the same as having been right." "I know," she said. "I am not presenting it as the same thing." "Then what are you presenting it as?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment. Outside the window, the city was doing its November thing, gray, purposeful, continuous. She said, "The first thing, not the whole thing." I said, "What's the whole thing?" She moved from the window to the desk. She sat, which was the same deliberate choice as the other night, the choice to stay, to be a person in the room rather than someone at a managed distance. She folded her hands on the desk. She said, "I am going to step back from operational leadership at Meridian into a founding partner and strategic advisor role. Dom will move into chief operating position, which she has been ready for 2 years, and which I have not moved her into because I was not ready to reduce my day-to-day role. And I would like to offer you a named creative director position with board standing. Not because that is the arrangement that makes the most business sense, though it does. Because it is the correct reflection of what you have already been doing and what I have been failing to acknowledge." The room was very quiet. I said, "That is an organizational restructure." She said, "Yes." I said, "You are not doing that as an apology." She said, "I am doing that because it is right. The apology is separate." I said, "Then say the apology." She looked at me. The composure was present now as what it actually was, not a wall between us, but the thing she was standing on while she said the difficult thing. A foundation, not a barrier. She said, "I removed you from the Cassiel client meetings because being in those rooms with you had become something I could not manage with neutral professional attention. I reassigned Sasha and Marcus because reducing the occasions that required us to work closely together was the only structure I could think to build around a thing I had decided I would not act on. I brought Oliver in because I needed a professional reason not to review your work directly. And I filed the Harlow submission without your name because I knew that the ceremony would require me to say your name aloud in front of 300 people, and I knew that I could not do that without everything underneath it becoming visible." She paused. "Every one of those decisions used the authority this organization gave me to protect myself from a feeling I had decided was not survivable. And every one of them cost you real professional ground you had earned, real recognition that was yours, real certainty about whether the person who brought you here believed in your work. You had every reason to doubt that. I made every reason for you. The accountability is that I did it knowing it was wrong from June, and I kept doing it anyway." She looked at the desk. "It was not the same," she said, "and I have known that since June, and I did it anyway." The room held the full weight of that for a moment. I said, "I know when it started." She looked up. I said, "May. The review. You cleared it." Something moved across her face, not surprise, but the specific movement of someone who has been seen in a place they believed was private. She said, "Yes, May." I said, "You filed your chair back from the table, you moved to the window, you gave me the wrap-up and you left in under 2 minutes." She said, quietly, "Yes." I said, and I let you go. Because I had the work, and I told myself the work was enough, and I did not want to name the thing I was naming. A silence. I said, you do not get to be the only one who decided to manage this badly. She looked at me. Something in her face shifted in the way that happens when an honest thing arrives and there is no counter-argument for it because it is simply accurate. She said, no, I suppose I don't. I said, the restructure. She said, yes. I said, that happens regardless of anything else. She said, yes. I said, and the apology, the specific one, the one you just gave that I heard. She said nothing. She was waiting, the composure working as a foundation. I said, I'm not ready to give you the rest of the conversation today. She said, I understand. I said, I need the time between the accounting and whatever comes after it to be real time. Not strategic time. Real. She said, yes. I said, I'm going to go work on the Lorne brief now. She said, it came in this morning. I know. Sasha put it on my desk. She almost said something. I could see the beginning of it, a thought about the brief, about the work, about the reflex to reconnect on the professional ground they had always been able to find each other on. She chose not to say it. She said, okay. I left her office. I went back to my desk. I opened the Lorne brief and I read it properly this time, beginning to end, with the full, focused attention it deserved. The thing about the work is that it had always been the truest place. The place where I knew exactly what I was doing and why. I stayed in it for the rest of the day and most of the week, and the work was good. The Lorne brief opened into something that had texture and depth, and the particular inheritance logic I had developed on Lumen applied now to space instead of scent. I spent 3 days on the first round of concepts and showed them to Cleo, who said, that's the one on the first page, stop there and build it out, which was the most useful note she had ever given me. The Phoebe Alden piece ran 2 weeks after the gala. Phoebe had been patient. She had waited for the Harlow Amendment to be published, which it was on the Friday Vale had promised. She had called Dom, as I had told her to do months ago, and this time Dom had put her through to Vale, and Vale had spoken to her on record for 45 minutes. The piece was 3,000 words. It covered the Lumen campaign from inception through the gala, and what came after. Vale answered every question on record without redirection. She said the carried forward concept was Rue Evander's The Inheritance Framework, the campaign title, the visual direction. She said, the failure to correct the record sooner was mine. Phoebe sent me the piece the night before it published. I read it at my kitchen table with the same city sounds outside and a very different interior than the one I had brought to this table the night of the gala. I read it twice. I texted Phoebe, thank you for being accurate. She texted back, thank you for not suppressing it. I wrote back, I didn't have any standing to suppress it. It was the truth. She wrote, that is, unfortunately, not how the world always works. I put my phone down. I thought about Vale sitting in her office answering Phoebe Alden's questions on record for 45 minutes, and I thought about what the specific cost of that was in the luxury brand industry, where the clean story is the lifeblood of the business, and the clean story had just become a complicated one. I thought about choosing the accurate version when the accurate version costs you something and nothing requires you to choose it. I thought about the fact that she had chosen it anyway. The studio restructure was announced in December. Dom Faber elevated to Chief Operating Officer, Rue Evander named Creative Director with board standing, Vale Mercer, transitioning to Founding Partner and Strategic Advisor. Industry Trades ran it as a story about studio evolution. One writer came close to the real thing. The restructure follows a period of internal realignment that placed Meridian's creative direction on firmer institutional footing. Vale's presence in the building changed. She was there, but not in the operational sense. She came in for strategic client meetings and for the sessions that required the founding partners' relationships. She did not come in to review creative concepts. She did not appear in the studio on late nights. I worked. The Lorne campaign developed into something I was genuinely proud of. The spatial inheritance angle became a campaign titled Inhabited, which was not as obvious a word as carried forward, but worked better for hotels, for the specific emotional architecture of arriving at a place that has been a place before you and will be a place after. I brought the first full deck to the Lorne team in early December, and the lead client said, midway through the presentation, "This is the feeling we did not know how to name." Cleo, sitting beside me, made a very small sound that I recognized as the sound she made when something landed the way it was supposed to land. After the presentation, in the cab back to the studio, she said, "You're going to be fine." I said, "I know." She said, "I mean professionally, in this role, with all of it." "I know," I said. She looked at the window for a moment. She said, quietly, "And the other part?" I said, "I'm still deciding." She nodded. She did not push further. Cleo had the particular wisdom of someone who understood that some decisions needed the right amount of silence around them before they could be made correctly, and she gave me the silence without being asked. December moved into January. The Harlow Amendment published a full citation for the Lumen campaign in their annual record, Carried Forward, Lumen by Cassiel. Creative direction, Rue Evander, Meridian Creative. It was 4 lines in a document that would be in the permanent industry archive. It was, in one sense, a very small thing. In the sense that mattered, it was the correct version of what had happened, and it would be the correct version going forward, and no amount of what had come before could change the fact that the permanent record now said the true thing. I printed the page. I did not frame it. I put it on my desk under a coffee cup and looked at it every so often and thought about 8 months and 47 revisions and a concept about inheritance. And I thought, yes, that is the right word. Vale did not contact me directly during this period, not to check in, not to discuss the work, not to do any of the things she might have done in the previous months under the cover of professional exchange. She held the distance I had asked for with the precision she brought to every difficult thing she decided to do completely, without wavering, without testing its edges. I noticed. I was always going to notice. The first week of February, I was in the studio at 7 in the evening. The Lorne campaign had entered production, which was the phase where I was less needed for conception and more needed for the particular vigilance of protecting a concept's integrity through execution, which meant late evenings reviewing production decks and the occasional very late evening doing it in person with the production team. The studio had emptied around 6. I had sent the last of the production notes and was cleaning up my desk in the particular efficient way of someone who has been sitting for 3 hours and needs the physical act of organizing something. I heard footsteps in the corridor. I knew them. I had known them for 22 months. The specific, unhurried economy of her movement. I had cataloged it without meaning to, and I could not uncatalog it now. Vale came through the open studio door. She was not in a suit. Dark trousers, a gray coat over a black sweater, the watch on the left wrist. Her hair was down. I had seen her hair down exactly twice before. Once on a late night in the first season when I had passed her in the corridor at 11 and she had come from wherever she had been and had not yet recomposed herself for the building. Once in the corridor backstage at the Whitmore, when the Gala had stripped the professional frame from everything, and she had been just a woman, with her hair still perfect, and her composure working as hard as it had ever worked. This was different. Her hair was down in the way it is down when someone has chosen to arrive as themselves rather than as the version of themselves that the building requires. She had made a decision about what this evening looked like, and she had dressed for the decision. I said, "The studio is closed." She said, "I know." Dom gave me the card access log. "Dom," I said. "Dom," she agreed. There was something in her voice on the word, not quite a smile. The acknowledgement of a person they both understood and had both, in their respective ways, relied on. She came into the studio. She did not sit. She stood in the middle of the room, which was the largest open space in the building, with the production boards still up on the walls, and the overhead lights on their evening setting not bright, not dark, the particular quality of a room that has been worked in all day. She said, "I told myself I would wait until you came to me. That was the right way to do it. Give you the time and the distance, and let you decide when the next conversation happened." She looked at the boards on the wall, not mine, the Lorne production boards from the team. She looked at them the way she looked at work, with complete attention, briefly, just long enough to understand what she was seeing. She said, "But I have been in this building for over a decade, and I have spent a significant portion of the last decade being disciplined about the things I could not permit myself to do. And I am 40 years old, and I am standing in a studio at 7 in the evening in February, and I need you to understand that I am done being disciplined about this specific thing, not reckless." Done being disciplined. I said, "You are giving me a speech." She said, "Yes. I'm sorry. It's the only tool I have." That made me laugh. Unexpectedly, from somewhere I had not planned to let it come from a laugh that was short and real, and arrived in the room before I could decide what to do with it. I saw something in her face when it landed. Something that opened slightly, the way things open when the specific sound they have been worried they would not hear arrives and turns out to be exactly what they hoped. I said, "What do you want to tell me?" She said, "Everything." I said, "Start with what you haven't said yet." She was quiet for a moment. The building hummed. Somewhere below us, the HVAC was doing its end-of-day thing. Outside, February was being February cold, specific, uninterested in sentiment. She said, "I noticed you in the conference room on the day of your first Meridian pitch. Not the work. You. I was supposed to be evaluating a proposal and I was watching you understand a room. The way you tracked the client's attention and fed it exactly what it needed without them knowing they were being fed. I had been doing that work for 12 years, and I had never watched anyone else do it and felt, I want to say, recognized. I had never watched anyone else do it and felt recognized." A pause. She said, "I hired you because the work was extraordinary, and I also hired you because I wanted to understand how someone thought the way you thought. And within the first 3 months I understood that those two reasons were not separable and that the second one was going to be a problem." I said, "May." She said, "May. The review. I sat across from you for 40 minutes, and you walked me through a campaign you had spent 8 months building without protecting it, the way I had asked you not to protect it. And it was the best thing I had seen in years. And when I told you that, you looked at me with, I do not have a better word than relief. Like you had been waiting for someone to see it clearly and it was me, and you had not expected it to be me, and that was somehow the better version of it, and I was the better version of it for you. I could see that I was, and I could feel what that meant to me to be that for you, and I knew, in that room, I knew exactly what I was feeling, and I knew what it would cost both of us if I acted on it. The room held that. She said, "So I acted on it in the only way I could permit myself to. I built distance. I put structure between us. I told myself it was protection for the organization, for your professional standing, for my obligations to you as your employer. And it was none of those things. It was fear. I was afraid of what I felt, and I used every professional tool I had to contain it. And the tools I chose cost you things I had no right to take from you." She looked at me. Straight, level, the composure present now as the truest thing about her, not a wall, just the specific quality of a woman who had decided to stand fully inside what she was saying. She said, "I am not asking you to forgive me for that. I am asking you to believe that I know precisely what I took from you, and I know precisely why it was wrong, and I am not going to tell you that the feeling behind it makes it less wrong." I looked at her for a long time. She waited. I said, "I know what happened in May." She said, "Yes." I said, "I knew in May, and I filed it." She said, "I know you did." I said, "I filed it because I had a job I needed to be real and a campaign I needed to finish, and because what I was naming was impossible." She said, "Yes." I said, "And then you made me watch you give that award away." "I know," she said, "and I am sorry, specifically for that. Standing at that microphone and choosing the version that erased you. I knew what I was doing when I did it, and I did it anyway. That is the worst of it. That is the part I am not going to be able to account for adequately because there is no adequate accounting for it." The boards on the wall caught the light. Somewhere in the building below, a door closed. I said, "I need you to hear my terms." She said, "Yes." I said, "The credit stays corrected, permanently." No future campaign that comes out of work I do is filed without my name. Yes, she said. I said, the restructure is real, not contingent on anything else. The board standing is mine, because the work earned it. Yes, I said, and you do not get to manage this from a distance anymore. Not the professional version of it and not any other version. If something is true, you say it. That is the condition. She looked at me. The gray coat, the watch, the hair down. Standing in the middle of the studio she had built and offered me without conditions, and then spent 7 months trying to take back in pieces. She said, that is a condition I have already been failing at for a long time. I said, I know. I'm asking you to stop failing at it. She said, yes. I will stop. I said, I am going to hold you to that. She said, I am counting on it. I looked at her. I had been looking at her, in one way or another, for 22 months. I had been cataloging the jaw flex and the shoulder stillness, and the half-second before she broke eye contact, and the way she moved through rooms, as though she knew what every room was for. I had been filing all of it in the category of professional context and declining to revisit any of it, and now I was 27 years old in a studio at 7 in the evening in February, and I was out of the professional context category entirely. And the thing I had been declining to revisit was standing 4 feet away with its hair down, waiting to hear what I decided. I crossed the 4 feet. She did not step back. The managed distance that had been between us for 22 months was finally gone, replaced by the specific quiet of 2 people who have said the difficult things and are standing on the other side of them. She looked at me the way someone looks when they have stopped managing the thing and are simply inside it. She said quietly, I should have said it in May. I said, yes. She said, I know. The composure was present, and for once not working as a wall, just a woman who had finally decided that honesty cost less than the alternative. I said, we are going to be very visible. She said, I know. I said, the industry is going to have opinions. She said, I have opinions about their opinions. That made me laugh again, the same laugh as before, real, arriving before I could manage it. She did something with the corner of her mouth that I had been cataloging for 22 months, 1 millimeter, the thing she only did when something had landed the way she had hoped it would land. I said, the Lorne campaign is in production. She said, I saw the boards. They're right. I said, I know they're right. She said, the inhabited concept. The spatial inheritance. I said, it came from Lumen. The same logic, different application. She said, I know it did. I recognized it immediately. I looked at her. The woman who recognized my work the way I recognized my own, who had described it in a conference room at the beginning of all of this as inevitability, and had been right, and had spent the following year trying to make it anything except what it was. I said, come have coffee with me. She said, now? I said, now. We left the studio. We walked out of the Meridian building together into the February city, which was cold and indifferent, and going on about its business without regard for the 2 women walking south on the sidewalk with their coats pulled against the cold, and the kind of quiet between them that is not empty, but full of everything that has just been said, and everything that is about to be said, and the particular satisfaction of finally being in the right place. The coffee place was 2 blocks away, warm and close, and smelling of the specific blend they used in February, darker, denser, the winter version of itself. We sat at the small table near the window that faced the street, and we ordered 2 things and talked for 3 hours. We talked about work. We talked about the Lorne campaign and the Harlow Amendment and Dom's elevation and how the Phoebe piece had landed. We talked about specific things and general things and the particular quality the conversation had when neither of us was managing it from a distance. When we left, she held the door. Outside on the pavement, she stood with her hands in the pockets of the gray coat and looked at me the way she had looked at me in the studio directly, without the professional frame, without the composure working as a barrier. She said, I'll see you tomorrow. I said, you'll see me tomorrow. She said, Rue. I said, What? She said, I have wanted to say your name like that for a long time. I said, I know. I could tell. She was quiet for a moment. She said, I'm sorry it took me this long. I said, You've paid what you owe. She nodded. Once. The decisive nod of someone who had been given permission to set something down and was choosing to accept it. We walked in opposite directions. At the corner I looked back. She was still on the pavement outside the coffee place, watching me go, with the gray coat and the February air, and an expression that had nothing managed about it, just a woman who had finally said the true thing and was living, for the first time in a long time, on the right side of it. The Harlow Grand Prix the following year ran a profile on the Meridian restructure in their program notes, industry evolution, creative partnerships, the record showing what the record now showed. Phoebe Alden was at the event, which I knew in advance because she had texted me a week before to say she was covering it and she would have questions and she wanted a real conversation this time. I said, You can have a real conversation. She said, Is that a change? I said, Yes. The gala was at the Whitmore again. Same chandeliers, same gold light. I arrived with Cleo, and we found our table second from the stage this year, the Lorne campaign having placed Meridian in a high-visibility position. Dom arrived, then Vale. She was in black, as she was always in black. The structured floor-length dress was different this year. She had chosen something quieter, less architectural, with the particular confidence of a woman who no longer needed the armor of the garment to announce herself. Her hair was up. The watch was on the left wrist. She sat beside me. The room saw it. The room saw it the way the room had seen everything about Meridian over the past 3 months, with the attentiveness of an industry watching an organization that had chosen the complicated path and was appearing to have survived. The table arrangements were not accidental. Nothing Vale Mercer did with physical space was accidental. And sitting beside me at the Harlow Grand Prix Gala the year after the incident that had generated more industry coverage than anything since the Lumen campaign itself was not an accident. It was a statement. She had decided to make it, and she had made it in the specific, unhurried way she made every decision she had fully committed to. I looked at her. She met my eyes. Neither of us looked away. The presenter for the Luxury Brand Experience category walked to the stage at 9:45. She said the things that were said before awards. She said the word inhabited. She said the campaign had been described by the judging committee as redefining the emotional language of space in luxury hospitality. She said, and the award goes to Rue Evander, Senior Creative Director, and Meridian Creative, for inhabited. The room stood. The kind of standing that is not polite applause but agreement, the room agreeing with something it had been watching arrive for a year. I stood. I walked to the stage. I accepted the award crystal, catching the chandeliers, the weight of it specific in my hands. I stood at the microphone. I said, This campaign came out of a conversation about what inheritance actually means, not what we receive deliberately, but what we carry without knowing we're carrying it. I have been thinking about that idea for a long time. I've had a lot of help thinking about it clearly. I thanked the client. I thanked Dom, who was running operations now with the steady competence that had always been there waiting for the title to catch up. I thanked Cleo. I thanked Sasha. I said their names the way names should be said fully, without omission, with the specific recognition of people who had done specific things. I said, and to Vale Mercer, who told me, the first time I ever presented work in a room she was in, that I made it look like inevitability. She was right about what I was doing. She was also right that the hardest thing there is to manufacture is the feeling of the already true. I owe that sentence most of what I know about how to do this work. I lifted the award. The room applauded. I walked down the stage steps. Vale was standing at the base of them. Not because the stage was in that direction. Not because the Meridian table required passing that way. She was standing at the base of the stage steps because she had chosen to be standing there in front of 300 people, in the same room where the other thing had happened, making the same kind of statement with her physical presence that she made with every deliberate use of space. I stepped off the last stair. She looked at me. those careful, cataloging eyes. "The award in my hands," she said, quietly enough for the two of us. "Congratulations." I said. "You told me it was already inevitable." She said. "I know." I said. "You were right." She said. "I usually am." And that, too, made me laugh, the same unmanaged laugh, arriving before anything else could catch it, in a room full of people who were watching, in the light that was the same gold light as last year and meant something completely different. Neither of us looked away. Neither of us moved to manage the moment, or reduce its visibility, or pretend the room was not watching. The spotlight, which had been punishing the last time it found us, felt different now. It felt like the truth, which is what the right light always feels like, when you are finally willing to stand in it.